Jack stepped onto the porch of a house that no longer knew him. The floorboards groaning under boots still caked with desert dust. No warm glow spilled from the windows. No voices rose to greet him. Just the low hum of a refrigerator, indifferent to his return. He pushed the door open, heart thudding, and saw Emily, his daughter, curled on the couch like a wounded bird. Her eyes, wide and wary, locked onto his, and she whispered, "Daddy, it hurts when I sit." That fragile voice cut deeper than any shrapnel. And Jack knew the war he'd left behind had seeped into this house, this town, cloaked in a silence that screamed of secrets. The bus hissed as it pulled away. His boots planted in the dust, like they didn't know where else to go. The air smelled of burnt wood and cold pine, the scent of a place that hadn't waited for him. He adjusted the strap of his old army backpack. The fabric was bleached in places, seams frayed where sandstorms and night patrols had worn it down. On one side, a small patch read "Marshall" in faded thread, the edges curling like something wanting to come undone. Gray Hollow hadn't changed. That was the first thing that made him ache, not in his bones, but somewhere deeper. The same cracked sidewalks, same sagging power lines, same store windows lined with dusty porcelain angels and closed Sunday signs. Maybe the flag didn't need a reason anymore. A breeze moved through the trees like a tired sigh. Yellowed, leaves let go without a sound. He passed a boy on a bike who didn't nod, didn't glance up. He paused at the gate. The latch still stuck a little. His hand hovered above it. He could hear his own breath, shallow, too quick. Then the door creaked open. Helen, his mother, stood there wrapped in a wool cardigan, a mug in one hand, steam rising weakly into the cold. Her hair had gone grayer than he remembered, pulled back in a bun like she'd done it without a mirror. "Well," she said, as if continuing a conversation that had paused years ago. "Come in, if you're staying." Jack didn't speak. He nodded. His backpack landed by the stairs with a soft thud. In the kitchen, the table was already set. 2 plates, 2 sets of silverware. No third. "Emily's upstairs," Helen said, sitting down slowly. "Didn't sleep much." Jack poured himself a glass of water. The faucet squealed like it had a memory of use. He stood by the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard. The grass yellowed. Swing set still, 1 rope missing. Frost coated the edge of the porch railing. But what caught his eye was something smaller, lighter. Footprints. Tiny bare. Later, he climbed the stairs, slowly, like someone carrying too much in places you couldn't see. The hall narrowed as he reached the far room. The door was slightly open, as if waiting. On the desk, a lamp that didn't reach the corners of the room. A stuffed bear, missing an eye, sat on the shelf, like it had stopped guarding long ago. On the floor, tucked near the dresser. He wasn't sure that mattered. The next morning came without ceremony. No bitzon, no warm light streaming through the curtains. Just the distant hum of the furnace kicking on, the faint clink of silverware, and the sound of old floorboards settling, like the house itself was sighing under the weight of something unspoken. Jack sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped loosely around a mug of coffee gone cold before the second sip. The steam had faded, but he still held it like warmth might return if he waited long enough. Across from him, Helen ate scrambled eggs with a kind of mechanical grace. Knife, fork, chew, sip, like someone performing a ritual that had outlived its meaning. Neither of them said much. The clock above the fridge ticked in slow defiance of the silence. On the far counter, a radio played faintly, a local station, voices crackling beneath static, talking about weather and pumpkin festivals, as if grief and wars and bruises were things that happened somewhere else. Jack glanced toward the stairs. Still no sound from upstairs. No footsteps. No creak of bed springs. No child humming. Just stillness. He hadn't seen Emily since he arrived. He wasn't sure if she was avoiding him or just used to being unseen. "You want more toast?" Helen asked, her voice scraping slightly like a rusted hinge. She didn't look at him. He shook his head. "No, thanks." A pause. "She's quiet lately," Helen offered. "But good. Well-behaved." Jack didn't answer. He just watched the way his mother's eyes didn't meet his. Well-behaved. That word caught in his chest. Soldiers were well-behaved. Prisoners were well-behaved. But children? He turned his mug once in his hand. The bottom left a faint ring on the table, joining others, old and overlapping like forgotten conversations. "I'll go see her," he said finally, pushing back his chair. Helen didn't respond, just picked up his plate and walked it to the sink, The clink of porcelain loud in the still room. Upstairs, the hallway was dim. The sun filtered through thin curtains, casting a pale gold onto the wood floor like someone had tried to paint warmth where none remained. Emily's door was cracked open again. He knocked, soft. A soldier's knock, respectful but controlled. No answer. "Hey, kiddo," he said gently. "It's Dad." Still nothing. He waited, then slowly pushed the door open. She was lying on her side, curled inward, her back to the room. The blanket bunched at her waist. Her long hair spilled across the pillow like it had given up trying to be combed. Jack didn't enter fully. He stepped just past the doorway, then sat at the edge of the bed. Not close, just enough that she might feel his presence without having to acknowledge it. He didn't touch her. He just sat there. For a long while, the only sound was the ticking of a small alarm clock on her nightstand. "You sleep okay?" he asked. Emily didn't respond. Her shoulder moved, just slightly. Not a shrug, not a nod. Just movement. "I used to lie still like that," Jack said quietly, more to the wall than to her. "When we were in the desert, sometimes the wind would blow so loud you'd think it was screaming. But you stay still, real still, and wait out." Another silence. He looked at her bookshelf, small chapter books lined up unevenly. A stuffed animal sat alone on the top shelf, and walked back down the hall. The day wore on. Jack tried to keep busy, stacked wood near the shed, tightened the hinges on the back screen door. But his hands kept pausing mid-task, like they were listening for something, like they expected someone to call out. By late afternoon, he found himself standing on the back porch, arms folded, watching the backyard where the frost had melted into dark patches on the grass. From a second-story window above, he noticed the curtain shift slightly. Emily's room. A flicker, then stillness again. He closed his eyes and breathed deep, inhaling pine, dry earth, and something else. The scent of life carrying on without you. After dinner, Jack offered to read. Helen didn't object. She just said she still likes Charlotte's Web, and handed him the old paperback from a drawer. He found it marked with a scrap of ribbon, its edges soft from years of turning. He knocked again that night. Waited. Still, no answer. But when he entered, Emily was awake, eyes open, staring at the wall. He sat and opened the book. His voice was low, unhurried, careful, not to command, not to entertain, but simply to be near. He read the passage where Charlotte first tells Wilbur she will help him. When he paused to glance at Emily, he thought she might have drifted off, until she whispered, barely audible, "It hurts when I sit." Jack's breath caught. The words landed soft, but sharp, like stepping on a small nail you didn't know was there. He didn't react, didn't lean in, just closed the book gently and placed it on the nightstand. "Did you fall?" he asked, voice steady. No reply. "Was it at school?" "Nothing." She curled tighter under the blanket. Jack didn't press. He knew that tone, that whisper of pain. It was the same kind he'd heard from soldiers who hadn't yet found the words for what they'd seen. So he just stayed, didn't touch, didn't explain, just sat beside her in the dark. Like a man who finally realized he wasn't the only one trying to survive something no one could see. Jack woke before the sun, out of habit more than purpose. The house creaked around him like an old ship settling in quiet water. He lay in the dark for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening for signs of movement upstairs, but none came. By the time the first light broke through the window, he was already halfway through his second cup of coffee, seated at the kitchen table. The mug left another faint ring beside yesterday's. Helen entered without a word, her robe drawn tight at the waist. She poured herself a cup and leaned against the sink, eyes fixed on the yard beyond. "I'll walk her to school," Jack said, not quite asking. Helen didn't turn. She only nodded once, the kind of nod that meant if you must. By the time Emily came downstairs, the sun had just begun to paint gold across the floorboards. She didn't meet his eyes either, just sat at the table and reached for the toast. He watched the way her fingers curled around the crust, careful, almost apologetic. He noticed how she tucked her knees together beneath the chair, how her shoulders stayed slightly hunched. Helen placed a small lunch bag beside her plate. "Eat up, we don't want to be late." Emily nodded. The meal passed in near silence, just the scrape of utensils, the rustle of napkins, the click of the clock. Jack tried to ask her what she was learning at school, but the answer, math, came without tone, without weight, like she was listing supplies. Afterward, she put on her backpack slowly, then paused at the door. Jack followed her out. The morning air was crisp. A thin fog hung over the street like breath that hadn't yet let go. Emily walked a few paces ahead, not running, not dragging her feet, just steady. They passed the fire hydrant at the corner, the vacant house with boards still up from last year's storm, the lilac bush near the bend where bees used to gather in the spring. Jack tried not to say much, just walked beside her. When they reached the schoolyard, kids were gathering in clusters, laughing, jostling backpacks, chasing each other in fits of shrill glee. Emily stopped just before the gate. Her fingers clenched the straps of her backpack. "You okay?" Jack asked. She gave a small nod, but didn't move. From across the yard, a teacher approached. She was tall, hair pulled back tightly, clipboard in hand. "Hi there," she said, extending her hand to Jack. "I'm Miss Clara, Emily's homeroom teacher." Her smile was quick, practiced. "She's a sweet girl," she added. "A little quiet, but that's nothing new." Jack shook her hand, studying her face, professional, polished, detached. "We're helping her adjust. It just takes time." She reached down and placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. The girl flinched. Not visibly, not dramatically, but enough that Jack saw it. A subtle recoil, a freezing. Clara didn't seem to notice. She just smiled and said, "Go on in now, sweetheart." Emily walked toward the doors without looking back. Jack watched her steps, even controlled, too precise for a child. Clara turned to him. "You're doing a good job just by being here, Mr. Marshall. Kids need presents." Jack forced a polite nod. "Thanks." Then she was gone. He stood there a while longer, staring at the closed door. He didn't know what he was waiting for. Maybe the sound of her voice through a hallway. Maybe just something human in that building full of rules. When he returned home, Helen was already vacuuming. "She'll be fine," she said over the drone. "It's a good school." Jack didn't reply. He went out to the porch and sat on the steps, watching the wind move through the dry leaves, trying to figure out what fine even looked like anymore. That afternoon, when Emily returned, her face was blank. Not tired, not upset, just absent. She sat at the table and began her homework without prompting. Jack brought her a glass of water. She thanked him, quiet as a page turning. Later, as the sun dipped low, he noticed her standing at the kitchen window. Not watching, just standing. "Want to take a walk?" he asked. She looked up, didn't smile, but didn't say no. They went out, side by side, past the bakery with its closed sign, past the library with its chipped brick steps, past the church where evening shadows stretched like thin fingers across the lawn. When they reached the playground behind the parish, children were running, throwing leaves, calling names Jack didn't know. Emily stopped, her arms folded loosely. "You can go play," he said. She shook her head. A boy dashed by, nearly brushing her shoulder. She stiffened, took a step back. Jack placed a hand on her arm, slow, gentle. "It's okay," he said, and it was. Not because things were fixed, not because she believed him, but because he didn't move. He stayed, and somehow for now, that was enough. That night, Jack didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table long after Helen had gone to bed, staring at the dark window as if expecting something to appear beyond the glass. Not a person, not a threat, just an answer. The refrigerator hummed faintly. The clock ticked like it was stalling. The rest of the house exhaled into stillness. Beside him, the old paperback of Charlotte's Web lay closed. The corner of the cover was peeling, and a coffee stain had bled through the first few pages years ago. He didn't open it this time. He just looked at it, held it, like it might remember something he didn't. Upstairs, there was no sound, no footsteps, no creaking floorboards, just the soft weight of silence pressing down on the walls. Then, faintly, the soft shuffle of movement, bare feet on wood, a door clicking gently open. Jack stood. He moved up the stairs with a slowness born from patrols, deliberate, steady, controlled. The hallway was lit only by the small bulb at the end, where the wallpaper had begun to peel from age and seasons. Emily's door was ajar. Again, he peered in, expecting to find her asleep. But she wasn't in bed. She stood near the window, barefoot, nightshirt brushing her knees, arms folded tight. Her face was turned toward the glass, pale in the moonlight, eyes wide open, but distant, not watching, not seeing. Jack stepped into the room. The floor gave a quiet creak. She didn't turn. He said her name, gently. "Emily." No answer. He moved closer, carefully, the way one would approach someone standing too close to a ledge. Her lips moved. At first he thought she was talking in her sleep, but then the words found shape. "I won't speak anymore." A pause. "I won't sit down again." Then, even softer, reverent almost, like she was reciting a vow. "Reverend, sir." Jack froze. The sentence fractured like frost breaking underfoot. She wasn't with him. She wasn't in the room. She was somewhere else, somewhere she didn't choose to be. He reached out slowly and placed a hand on her shoulder. Emily flinched violently, then collapsed to the floor, arms shielding her head, knees drawn up. Hey, it's me, Jack said quickly, crouching beside her. Just me, sweetheart. Just Dad. You're okay. Her breathing came fast, shallow. Her eyes darted. Then, gradually, her body registered the floor, the walls, the warmth of the nightlight. She wasn't in a cold room anymore. She wasn't being watched by that voice. She was home. He helped her up, not lifting, just guiding, and settled her back into bed. She clung to the blanket with both hands, the way children hold on to something not because it protects, but because it's the only thing they have control over. Jack sat beside her, not close, just near enough. He didn't speak. There was no explanation, no follow-up. No, what did he do? Or why didn't you tell me? He simply stayed. Minutes passed. The night light flickered once. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes didn't close, but they softened, just enough to stop seeing what wasn't there. Jack looked around her room again, now from a different angle. The drawings on the wall, stars, animals, a crooked house, all seemed too quiet now. The colors too faint. On the dresser, a tiny hairbrush with missing bristles lay untouched. He reached over and picked it up, turning it in his hand. Not because he planned to brush her hair, but because he realized no one else had in a long time. Later, when she had drifted toward sleep, he turned off the light and left the door open just a crack. In the hallway, he stood for a moment, one hand on the wall, like he was steadying himself. Back downstairs, the house felt colder. He went into the laundry room. The floor was cool under his feet. A basket of Emily's dirty clothes sat near the washer. He crouched beside it and began sorting, more from instinct than need. As he picked up a pair of gray leggings, his hand paused. Near the hip, under the fold, a faint discoloration, not dirt. A smudge of purple, round, the size of a thumbprint. A bruise. Old. Fading. But there. Jack didn't touch it. He just looked at it. And something in him, something long pressed down, began to rise. He folded the leggings carefully and placed them in a separate basket. Then he stood, closed the washer lid, and walked out without turning off the light. That night, he sat in the living room, lights dimmed, TV on but muted. Helen passed behind him once, holding a cup of tea. She didn't speak. Neither did he. But in that quiet, he realized something simple and terrible. There had been bruises long before he arrived, and everyone had just gotten used to them. Morning came without question. The kind of morning where everything seemed the same: toast, eggs, orange juice in a sweating glass. Yet nothing sat right. The air in the kitchen was tight, heavy, like it had been holding its breath all night and still hadn't let it out. Emily came down dressed for school. Her sweater sleeves hung past her wrists. She didn't speak, just pulled out the same chair, sat, and folded her hands on her lap. Helen placed a plate in front of her. "Eat," she said softly. Jack watched. Not the food, not the hands, but the posture. Emily didn't rest against the back of the chair. She sat forward, hovering slightly, as if the wood behind her had teeth. She shifted every few moments, not fidgeting, but adjusting like someone trying not to press into something that hurt. Helen didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did and had learned not to. After breakfast, Jack offered to walk Emily to school again. She didn't object, didn't say yes, just pulled on her coat and waited at the door. The walk was quiet, but her steps were slower than yesterday, as if she was weighing each one, as if the sidewalk might crack beneath her. When they reached the schoolyard, she hesitated at the gate again, same as before, only this time. She turned slightly and looked up at him, just for a second. Then she walked in. Jack stood outside the fence longer than he meant to, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the building like it might give something away. He didn't go home. Instead, he walked across town to the small grocery store Natalie, Emily's mother, used to love. The sign above the door still had a painted sunflower chipped at the edges. Inside, everything looked smaller. The shelves, the aisles. Even the woman behind the counter, Dottie, who used to babysit Jack when he was small, now had wrists too thin for her watch and eyes that blinked too slowly. "Well, I'll be," she said, recognizing him. "Back in town, huh?" He nodded, picked up a few things. Milk, apples, a box of crackers he remembered Emily liking when she was 5. As he stood at the counter, another woman walked past, muttering to Dottie under her breath. "Some kids these days need more structure. Can't be letting him run wild with feelings." Jack said nothing, but the word structure stayed with him all the way back to the house. That afternoon, he waited until school let out. He parked a block away and watched as children spilled out onto the sidewalk like marbles from a jar. Noisy, bouncing free. Emily came out last. Her steps slow, eyes down. Jack didn't call to her. Just watched as she turned the corner, cutting across the back lot of the school. Not toward home, but toward the church. He followed. Not close. Not too far. The path led to a side door near the rear of the chapel. Old, wooden, chipped around a handle. Emily entered with a few other children. The door shut with a soft click, not sharp, not loud, but final. Jack stood across the street, behind a utility pole. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Leaves scurried across the pavement. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. He circled the building, finding a narrow window along the back wall. Too high for a child to reach, just low enough for him to see if he stood on the stone border. He did. What he saw inside didn't scream, didn't bleed, didn't threaten, but it chilled him in a way battlefields never had. A small room, a dozen children, each sitting on a long wooden bench, back straight, hands folded, lips closed, eyes vacant. At the front, Reverend Dale stood in stillness, holding a book, not preaching, not gesturing, just speaking in a tone Jack couldn't hear, but felt. If you don't know how to be still, he imagined the voice saying, how can you hear anything worth hearing? Jack watched for a long time. Long enough to notice no child shifted. Long enough to see that this wasn't discipline. It was a ritual. Long enough to realize Emily had been sitting still long before he came home. And now, he understood why her eyes didn't meet his. That night, Jack sat at the edge of the bed, not his own. He had returned from the church without a word. Emily never knew he had followed. Helen had asked what he was doing home so late, and he'd said just walking. She didn't press. Dinner was quiet. Emily picked at her food, toast, eggs again. Nothing hot, nothing comforting. Her fork scraped against the plate with a rhythm that was too precise for a child. One bite, chew, pause. One bite, chew, pause. Helen mentioned something about a bake sale coming up, but her voice drifted into static. Jack didn't eat much. Later, when Emily had gone upstairs and the dishes had been cleared, he sat with his laptop open, fingers hovering over the keys, but not typing. The screen glowed dimly, casting a pale light on his face, but the document was blank. What was he even looking for? Evidence? A name? He searched Reverend Dale, ethics class, Bells Hollow. Nothing. He searched child discipline, church silence. Still nothing. No police reports. No complaints. Just a few articles about the Reverend being a moral compass for the community. A photograph from 3 years ago showed Dale shaking hands with a mayor, holding a leather-bound Bible. Face fixed in that expression some men wear like armor, kindness without warmth. But Jack had seen something else in those eyes now. Not rage, not violence, control. And that, somehow, was worse. He closed the laptop and leaned back. The room was too still. From upstairs, a faint creak. He climbed the stairs softly and past Emily's door. The nightlight was on. Her shadow moved just behind the curtains. She wasn't asleep. He didn't go in. He just stood outside her door with his hand on the wood, not knocking. When she finally lay still again, he returned to his own room and pulled out an old spiral-bound notebook from his duffel bag. It still smelled faintly of dust, sweat, and heat, like sun-baked canvas from Kuwait. Inside were grid maps, half-torn pages of coordinates, jottings in shorthand only soldiers would recognize. He flipped to a blank page and wrote, Tuesday, 5 p.m., ethics class, back door. No noise, no movement. Children seated, back straight, eyes forward. He stared at the sentence, then added, not discipline. Silence. Train silence. The pen hovered, then moved again. Emily flinched. Shoulder, right side. And then, old bruise, size of thumb. Left hip. He didn't write how that felt. Didn't need to. A few days later, after Helen had left to run errands and Emily was at school, Jack wandered into the laundry room again. He didn't mean to. He stood in front of the basket and reached in, fingers sifting through the clothes like he was searching for something he didn't want to find. Near the bottom, a shirt. Small, pink, long sleeves. He held it up. The hem was clean, the fabric light. But near the neckline, a stretched thread, slightly torn as if someone had pulled it. He folded it back neatly, then saw something at the very bottom of the hamper. A sheet of lined notebook paper. He picked it up. It had been folded in fourths, then unfolded and flattened again. Crayon writing. No title, just one line, written in small, uneven letters. If I promise to be good, maybe I won't have to sit. Jack stood in the laundry room a long time, not moving, not thinking, just holding the paper like it had weight, like it had heat. When Helen returned, she called his name from the kitchen, but he didn't answer. He walked outside instead, down the steps, into the yard, letting the cold air slap him awake. And for the first time since he came home, he realized something brutal. Emily hadn't just been alone while he was gone. She'd learned to be alone even when people were in the same room. That night, as they sat in the living room, TV on low, Helen knitting, Emily drawing at the table, Jack spoke. Not loud, not forced, just enough to be heard. I'll take you to school tomorrow, Em. She looked up, nodded once. We can stop at the bakery on the way, if you want. She didn't smile, but she nodded again. He watched her return to her drawing. Her fingers moved slowly, carefully, like each color had to be earned. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't need to, because for the first time in weeks, maybe months, Emily had let someone make a plan with her. And that somehow felt like the smallest kind of yes. Wednesday morning was gray again, but in a softer way. Not the cold kind that presses down, but the kind that holds its silence like a wool blanket. Heavy, but not unkind. Jack was already up when Emily came down. He'd made toast. Not perfect, a little overdone, but warm. The butter had started to melt in the middle. He didn't say anything when she entered the kitchen, just nodded to the seat across from him. She sat. Helen was not there that morning. A doctor's appointment in town, she'd said the night before. Jack didn't ask more. Emily ate slowly. Her spoon hovered longer than it should, but she didn't flinch today when he poured her orange juice. Her eyes met his for half a second before they drifted away again, but it was still something. You still want to stop by the bakery? Jack asked. Emily nodded, a soft one, the kind that felt borrowed from someone else's courage. She pulled on her coat without needing help. Jack opened the door and held it, letting her step through first. Outside, the wind was still. Leaves from the neighbor's oak lined the edges of the sidewalk like forgotten envelopes. The air smelled of damp wood and distant chimney smoke. They didn't talk much on the walk. But it wasn't the silence of before, not hollow, not hard. It was the kind of silence that sits between two people when words aren't needed, or maybe when they're just waiting their turn. The bakery was a small brick place on the corner. Same woman behind the counter, same glass display case filled with imperfect pastries that all seemed too sweet to be angry at. Pick whatever you want, Jack said. Emily pointed. A cinnamon twist. Jack added a black coffee. The woman behind the counter smiled like she recognized him, but didn't want to say so. You're her dad, she said. Good to see you around again. Jack gave a faint smile. Trying to be. They sat on the bench outside. The metal was cold. Jack unwrapped Emily's pastry, handed it to her like a peace offering made of sugar and apology. She took a bite, small and quiet. Then another. He watched her chew. Not like a father hovering, but like a man watching a fire he thought had gone out begin to flicker again. When they arrived at school, Emily hesitated again at the gate. But instead of freezing, she looked at him. Not for help, just to be sure he was still there. I'll wait here after class, Jack said. You won't have to walk to that other place alone. She nodded. Then she turned and went in. This time, he didn't wait by the fence. He walked to the other side of the street, took up a spot near the trees, close enough to see the side entrance of the church. Not hiding, just out of the way. At 4:03, the same door opened. Emily and 5 other children stepped out. Their faces were blank, eyes downward. Not tired, something else. Something less visible. Jack watched as they filed out in silence. Bags slung over small shoulders, shoes scuffing against the steps. No one laughed. No one talked. Emily's feet touched the ground, then stopped. She looked around, uncertain, until her eyes found him. She blinked once, then walked over. Jack didn't speak. They walked home without a word, past the same trees, the same mailboxes, the same cracked sidewalk seems he remembered from his own childhood. But it all looked different now, as if the silence of those children had seeped into the concrete. That evening, after dinner, Emily sat in the living room armchair, her legs tucked underneath, a book resting in her lap. She wasn't reading, just flipping pages slowly, like her fingers were remembering how. Jack sat across from her, not too close. Is that a good one? He asked. She shrugged. You doing okay? A pause. Then yes. It wasn't convincing, but it wasn't automatic either. He waited a moment, then leaned back in his chair. If something's making you uncomfortable, he began, but stopped. Emily didn't look up. She closed the book and hugged it to her chest. It's okay. Dad, everything's normal. That word, normal. It landed between them like a drawer slamming shut. He knew that kind of normal. The kind soldiers whispered to each other after roadside bombs. After firefights. After burial details. Everything's normal. When nothing is. That night, Jack couldn't sleep again. He stood by the window, looking out at the porch light across the street. A moth buzzed at the glass for a few seconds, then vanished into the dark. He thought about the word Emily had used, how it had once meant safe, and now it only meant survivable. When he finally turned away, he left the bedroom door open just a little, and downstairs on the kitchen table, he left a note in Emily's handwriting from days ago, the one she thought he hadn't seen. If I promise to be good, maybe I won't have to sit. He didn't hide it, just set it there carefully, like a truth waiting to be acknowledged. Thursday brought rain. Not the loud kind, not a storm, just a steady tapping against the windows. Like the house was remembering something it couldn't quite say. Emily came downstairs later than usual. Her eyes were puffy, though she hadn't cried at breakfast. Jack noticed she wore long sleeves again, even though the house was warm. Helen didn't comment. She just handed Emily a slice of toast and turned back to the sink. Jack poured coffee into a chipped white mug. He didn't sit yet, just stood, fingers wrapped around the handle like it anchored him. The night before, he'd left that note, the one Emily had written, right there on the kitchen table. This morning, it was gone. No one mentioned it, and maybe that was the first real conversation they'd had. After breakfast, Emily waited at the door, her backpack on, shoes already damp from the porch. You still want to stop at the bakery? Jack asked. Emily looked down. Then, quietly, not today. He nodded. The walk to school was slower. The rain didn't stop them, but it made the world smaller. Sidewalks glistened, roofs ran like waterfalls, birds huddled in branches and didn't sing. They reached the schoolyard and paused under the awning. Emily turned to him. Her lips parted, then closed. Jack waited. Then, very softly, she said, "You don't have to wait after school." He squatted at her eye level. "I don't have to," he said. "But I want to." She didn't reply, just blinked once, and walked through the gate. Jack watched her disappear into the building, her small frame swallowed by brick and shadow. He didn't walk away. He crossed the street, took shelter under the church awning, and waited. Not for her, for the bell, for the ritual, for the silence. At exactly 3:59 p.m., the back door opened again. A boy stepped out first, then another. Emily was third. Jack counted 12 steps from door to sidewalk. None of them spoke. But Emily, today, paused. Just 1 second, then looked over her shoulder. Right at him. Jack didn't wave, didn't smile. He just stayed where he was. When she turned back and walked away, she did so just a little straighter. That night, the rain kept falling. Jack sat in the living room, polishing a pair of old boots. Not his. They were Emily's, her rain boots from when she was 6. Discovered in the garage earlier that afternoon. The rubber had cracked. One sole was loose, but he wiped them anyway. Emily came down around 8. She held a blanket, dragging slightly on the hardwood floor. "Can I sit with you?" she asked. He nodded. She didn't sit on the couch. She took the armchair across from him, curled her knees under the blanket, and rested her chin on the armrest. "Are you going to go away again?" she asked. Jack's hand stopped moving. "No," he said. "Not unless you want me to." Silence. "Then what if I'm not good?" He looked up. Her eyes weren't searching. They were bracing, like she was already expecting the leaving. He set the boots aside. "You don't have to be good for me to stay, Em." Her lip trembled. Just a little. Then she turned her head, burying her face into the blanket. Jack didn't move closer, but he spoke, slow and low, like talking to someone asleep beside a campfire. "When I was away, sometimes we'd sleep on concrete, sometimes dirt, but there was this one spot near a fence line, and we found an old couch someone had left behind. Torn, stained, ugly, but it was soft." Emily peeked up at him. "I never forgot that couch," he said, "because even though it was broken, it still held me." She didn't say anything. He added, "I think people are kind of like that too. Don't stop being worth sitting with even when they're tired." Emily's eyes welled. She didn't cry, but she slid off the armchair and moved toward the couch. Sat next to him, just barely touching his side. Jack didn't put his arm around her. He just let her be close. Let her choose how near she could bear to be. The rain outside softened. In the hallway, the kitchen light clicked off. Helen, moving through the dark. Jack looked down at Emily. Her eyes were closed, and even though nothing had been fixed, even though the Reverend still held sermons behind closed doors, even though the word normal still hung in the air like smoke, tonight, there was a chair pulled closer. And that was enough. Friday was clear. clear in that strange, disquieting way after a week of rain, when everything looks cleaner but you know nothing has changed underneath. The streets shone. The sidewalks steamed faintly in the morning sun. The town looked new, but Jack knew better. He sat on a porch, elbows on knees, a mug of black coffee gone cold in his hands. Emily was upstairs getting ready. She hadn't said much at breakfast, but she had eaten half a banana and a slice of toast. Progress, maybe, or just habit. The boots he'd polished the night before sat by the door. Not hers anymore, too small, but he couldn't bring himself to throw them out. Helen leaned against the doorframe behind him. She sipped tea from a faded floral cup and didn't speak. They hadn't talked much about anything lately. Jack cleared his throat. Did Emily ever tell you anything about church? Helen's expression didn't change. She said she liked the stories. What kind of stories? Helen shrugged. Noah's Arkansas. The Good Samaritan. She likes drawing animals. What? He didn't answer. Because it wasn't about the stories. It was about the silence. At 3:45 that afternoon, Jack stood across the street from Bell's Hollow Community Chapel. The sun was beginning to dip, but the angle of light made everything too bright, too clean. The red brick glowed. The wooden doors gleamed. The glass above the sanctuary reflected the sky like a mirror. He walked the perimeter of the building. Not fast, not like a man sneaking. Just a father, maybe lost, maybe looking. Behind the church, where the ethics class gathered after school, he counted the windows. 6 along the right wall. But something fell off. He stood under one and waited. At 4 o'clock, he heard voices, soft, low, rehearsed. A hymn. Children's voices. Not singing. Reciting. Like multiplication tables. Bless those who obey. Punish those who stray. No melody. Just words. Jack's jaw clenched. He stepped back. No one else seemed to hear. At dinner, Emily was quiet again. Not fearful, just tired in that way a child shouldn't be. She rubbed her wrists absent-mindedly. Jack noticed. Later, while she brushed her teeth, he checked her backpack. Nothing alarming. Just paper. A spelling test. A drawing a house with a cross on top. Stick figures stood outside. One had no face. At the bottom, in neat child's handwriting, I'll do better. Please. He folded the paper and left it where it was. Helen came into the living room with a laundry basket and sat on the floor to fold. Jack lowered his voice. Has she said anything strange? Anything about punishment? Helen didn't look up. She said Reverend Dale gives everyone quiet points. She's proud of them. Jack frowned. Quiet points? Helen shrugged. It's a behavior thing. The kids earn them for sitting still, not speaking out of turn. Jack stared at her. That doesn't sound like ethics. It's discipline, she said. Structure. Something kids need. He didn't argue. Because something deeper than logic was gnawing at him now. Something slower. Something about how Emily never looked surprised anymore. Only ready. That night, he pulled out his notebook again. Observation, Friday, 3:59 p.m. 12 children, single file. 0 conversation. 0 variation. Same as Monday. Tuesday. Thursday. He tapped the pen. Then added. Cultivated compliance. Not natural. No deviation. Possible fear-based control. Emotional withdrawal. He closed the notebook and set it on the windowsill. Stared out at the moon above the street lamp. The town looked peaceful, and that suddenly terrified him. Because peace built on obedience, especially from children, was not peace at all. Saturday was slow. Mornings in Bell's Hollow always were. But this one felt suspended, like the town had taken a breath and forgotten to let it out. Jack sat at the edge of the porch, tying his boots even though he had nowhere to go. Habit. It kept his hands busy, kept him from staring too long at the same loose board on the steps or the cracks in the paint along the window frames. Time left things behind. Helen had taken the truck to the farmer's market. Emily was upstairs, quiet in her room, though Jack heard the soft clink of pencils against glass. She'd started drawing again. That mattered. He made coffee, stood in the kitchen too long, then walked down the hallway and paused outside her door. The wood was old and thin. It carried sound like skin carries memory. He didn't knock, didn't intrude, just listened. There was no humming, no music, just the small sound of movement, maybe her feet swinging from the edge of the bed, maybe the pencil dragging lines across paper that only made sense to her. He sat down just outside the door, back against the wall, legs stretched out, and waited. He didn't know what for. Minutes passed. The house creaked. The refrigerator cycled. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Then he heard it, so faint he thought he imagined it. Emily's voice, not speaking to anyone, just rehearsing, whispering. If I don't talk, Maybe it won't happen. Maybe I'll get more stars. Maybe I can sit in the front again. Jack's heart slowed. He closed his eyes. She whispered again, this time softer, not words, just the rhythm of someone trying to quiet their own head. He didn't move, didn't interrupt, because to stop her now would break whatever fragile truth was slipping through that door. Eventually, the creaking stopped. Silence returned. Jack stood slowly, walked to the front of the house. In the living room, he noticed Emily's sketchbook on the table. She never left it there. He didn't open it right away. Just looked at the cover, plain blue. The corners softened from weeks of fingers. On the edge, her name written in crooked block letters. He opened to the middle. There were drawings. Pages and pages of them. A row of chairs. Each one smaller than the last. A hallway with doors, but no handles. A figure with a long face and no mouth. One page showed a star chart. Not constellations, but stickers. Labeled good, better, best. Beneath the stars, a small stick figure seated cross-legged, its arms folded behind its back, head bowed. Jack stared at the page, not just because of what was drawn, but because in the margin, in faint pencil, were the words, I didn't mean to cry. Please don't tell. He closed the book, gently, carefully, like it might fall apart in his hands. That night, Helen made stew. Jack didn't eat much. Emily had a few bites, then pushed the rest around her bowl. No one said it out loud, but all three of them could feel it, the edge of something pressing closer. After dinner, Jack asked, can I read you something? Emily looked up, surprised. Like a story? Something short? He said. She nodded. He pulled out a small green book, old, with creases down the spine. Not a children's book, just one he carried overseas. A collection of essays, thoughts, fragments. He didn't read it often, but tonight felt right. He sat beside her on the couch. Listen, he said quietly. The body remembers what the mouth cannot say. The body flinches before the mind understands. The child inside, unheard, will still speak, in drawings, in silence, in dreams. And sometimes in the quiet, we hear what was never allowed to be spoken. When he looked up, Emily wasn't looking at the page. She was looking at him. And for the first time, there was something raw in her gaze, not fear, not confusion, recognition, like she understood he had heard, that he knew, not everything, but enough. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Later that night, long after she'd gone to bed, Jack stood outside her door again. The hallway was dark except for the sliver of lamplight behind him. Inside the room, the soft sounds of sleep. But just before he turned to leave, he heard again. Her voice. Small, drowsy, not to him, not even meant to be heard. Please don't make me sit on his lap again. Jack's breath caught, not because he didn't expect it, but because some truths are too big to be guessed. They have to be heard. He stepped back, into the dark, into what came next. Sunday broke pale and slow. Clouds hovered low over Bell's Hollow. Like the sky itself hadn't slept. Trees stood stiff in the windless morning. The town was quieter than usual, not in that peaceful, porch swing kind of way, but like everyone was holding their breath for something they couldn't name. Jack stood at the kitchen counter, tying his tie. He hadn't worn one in years, not since Caleb's funeral. The knot felt foreign, tight against the throat, but it gave his hands something to do. And today, he needed them still. Helen sat at the table, sipping coffee, not looking at him. You don't have to come, she said. I know, Jack answered. He didn't look at her either. Emily came down dressed in a cream-colored dress with little blue flowers. She looked too neat, like someone else had picked the clothes. Her hair was brushed back into a tight braid, no loose strands. She didn't speak as she climbed into the truck, just stared out the window. The pews filled slowly. Jack held Emily's hand as they walked down the center aisle. She flinched slightly when they passed the second row. He noticed. They sat near the back. The organ played something slow, the kind of hymn people sing from memory, but never think about. Jack didn't know the words. He didn't try. The sanctuary was too warm. The stained glass windows spilled colored light across the polished floor, casting reds and blues across Emily's dress. She sat very still. Then the Reverend came out. Reverend Dale, mid-50s. Then a parable. Then silence. And then what he called discipline of the week. A boy stood up. Jack recognized him from the schoolyard. Thin, bony elbows, hence clasped too tight. The boy recited a verse. Something about obedience and humility. The congregation nodded. The Reverend smiled. Emily didn't move. But Jack saw her fingers digging into her own thighs under the hem of her dress. He leaned in slightly. You okay? He whispered. She didn't answer. Didn't blink. Didn't even seem to breathe. Then the Reverend said something that froze the air in Jack's lungs. Some children, though small in frame, carry stubborn hearts. But we guide them gently, with stillness, with correction, with love shaped like discipline. Some people chuckled like it was a joke. Others nodded, solemn. Emily's shoulders tightened. Jack sat back slowly, his jaw tense. After service, people filed out smiling, saying things like that was beautiful or he's such a shepherd. Jack didn't speak, didn't shake hands. He just watched Reverend Dale walk down the aisle, one hand brushing the heads of children as he passed, like he was blessing livestock. When he reached their row, he stopped. "Jack," he said warmly, "I've heard about your return. Welcome home." Jack nodded once. Emily looked at the floor. The Reverend leaned in, gently touching Emily's shoulder. She stiffened. "I hope you'll join us for youth reflection this Thursday," he said. "We'd love to have our little lamb back in the fold." Jack stepped forward just slightly. Emily's voice broke through, just above a whisper. "I don't want to." The Reverend smiled wider. Still gentle, still polished. "Well, sometimes what we want isn't what we need, sweetheart." He touched her head, then walked away. Jack didn't follow, didn't say a word. But when they got outside, into the cold air and the gray light of early afternoon, Emily turned to him and said something that pierced like a nail through wood. His hand smelled like the room. Jack crouched. "What room, Em?" She shook her head. Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. "I don't want to go back there." Jack took her hands. "You won't," he said. And this time he meant it. Back at the house, Helen stood at the sink. "I saw how you looked at him," she said. Jack didn't answer. She turned. "Jack, if you make trouble, they'll come for us. They'll call it slander. Emily will be pulled in, questioned, blamed." "I'm not making trouble," he said. "I'm protecting my daughter." Helen's eyes softened, then narrowed. "Do you know what that man does for this town?" "I know what he did to Emily," Jack said. "I don't need more than that." That night, Jack didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with Emily's sketchbook. On the last page, there was a drawing of a man with no eyes, standing at the front of a room full of children with no mouths. And in the corner, a tiny figure crawling under a bench. Jack ran his hand over the paper. Then he opened a fresh page and started to write. Monday returned without ceremony. Clouds still hung low, the same dull gray that had painted the weekend. Bell's Hollow didn't seem to notice anything had changed, and maybe it hadn't, not on the surface. But Jack felt it under his skin, the slow, unmistakable stir of something cracking open. He walked Emily to school. Other parents milled around, making small talk, the kind of idle murmurs that make towns feel familiar and sometimes complicit. Jack nodded at a few familiar faces. No one asked why he was walking her himself now. Inside the building, he spotted Ms. Talbot, the ethics teacher, young, with sharp eyes and a voice that carried authority beneath politeness. He waited until the last child disappeared into the classroom, then approached her. "Morning," he said. She looked up. "Mr. Carter, good to see you again. Emily seems to be adjusting well." Jack forced a small smile. "I had a question about youth reflection." Her face didn't change, but the pause said enough. "Oh, Reverend Dale mentioned it. Said it's been helpful." She shifted the papers in her hands. "It's voluntary, a program designed to help students reflect on discipline and choices." "Voluntary," Jack echoed. She nodded. "Though, of course, students are strongly encouraged. Structure can be very healing for children who've experienced trauma." Jack said nothing. Just watch her. Then, like the words might shift into new truths if he just stared long enough. Later that day, Jack stopped by the post office. The woman at the desk, Paula, late 50s, wore Christmas earrings year-round, smiled when she saw him. "Look who finally found his way back." Jack smiled. Never too late. He asked about a package Helen had mentioned. Nothing had arrived yet. Then, casually, "You still handle the mail for the church?" "Mostly," she said. "Bunch of newsletters and donation slips. Sometimes confidential forms from the school." "The usual." "Confidential how?" She leaned in, half whispering. "Disciplinary records, mostly. Kids sent to youth reflection, that sort of thing." He raised an eyebrow. "So it's documented?" She blinked, realized something, then nodded slowly. "I probably shouldn't have said that." Jack gave her a gentle smile. "You didn't." That evening, he sat on the porch with his coffee, watching the wind try to move trees that didn't want to bend. Emily colored beside him, not saying much. "Did they make you sit on Reverend Dale's lap?" he asked softly. Her hand stopped moving. She didn't answer. He didn't push. After a minute, she said, only when I cried too much. Jack closed his eyes. Inside, Helen clanged pans in the kitchen, louder than needed. A kind of protest without words. She hadn't asked what Jack was doing all day. Hadn't needed to. But that night, after Emily was asleep, she stood in the hallway, arms crossed. She said he made her sit on his lap. After she cried, Helen didn't speak, didn't move. Then, people won't believe it. I don't care. They'll call her confused. Say she's making it up. Say you're projecting. Jack closed the notebook. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm seeing things because I've been in places where monsters don't wear masks. He stood, walked to the window, looked out into the night where the church steeple barely glowed. But maybe this time, he said, the monster smiled too much. And nobody asked why. Helen didn't follow him when he stepped outside. Her spoon barely made a sound. Jack watched her from across the table. She looked fine, too fine, as if she practiced being okay. That, more than anything, made his chest ache. He walked her to school again. They didn't talk much on the way. She hummed a little, tuneless and low, like a sound to fill silence instead of chase it. When they reached the gates, Emily squeezed his hand, not like a child, like someone who knows they're entering a room where their voice won't matter. I'll be here, Jack said. She nodded, didn't look back. Jack didn't leave. He stood across the street, just beyond the parked cars, pretending to check his phone, pretending to wait for someone. He watched the children enter, watched Reverend Dale pull up in his spotless sedan, step out with a cup of coffee and a book of devotionals tucked under his arm. The Reverend greeted the principal. They laughed. The principal gestured toward the playground. Jack didn't miss the way Emily's body tensed when she saw him. That afternoon, he went to the hardware store, bought a lockbox, and a second notebook. The first one had Emily's drawings. This one will hold the town. He started at the church, not inside, just around it. Walked the perimeter like he was measuring fence posts, nodding to no one in particular. He looked like a man remembering old sermons. But he wasn't listening to ghosts. He was watching the windows, especially the one on the far side of the annex, facing the trees, half blocked by a broken trellis. Later, he sat in the library, flipping through public records. Meeting minutes, budgets. They're buried in the fiscal log, he saw it. Line item 42B, allocated funds for youth moral restoration, approved under church annex usage agreement, school board co-signed. He took a photo. That night, while Emily slept, he made a list. List of confirmed. Emily, age 7. Peter L., age 9, seen leaving annex with tear stains, 9/12. Claire M., age 8. Missed 2 consecutive Thursdays after refusing to enter annex. List of adults present. Reverend Dale. Mrs. Kirby, youth assistant, retired nurse. Mr. Alton, groundskeeper. No children of his own. Each name, a knot in his gut. He wasn't building a case. He didn't trust courts. He was building a map. And maps, if drawn with enough care. Rehearsed. He saw one child rise, then pause, then sit again, slowly. Jack gripped his pen so tightly it left a mark in the notebook. 8:34 p.m. Child refused to stand. Possible fear. He said, it's about what she needs to sleep. Helen sat beside him. Do you remember when we thought this place would save us? She asked. He nodded. We were wrong. Silence settled like snow, but Jack didn't feel cold. He looked out toward the edge of town, where the steeple just barely pierced the sky. I don't need justice, he said. Helen looked over. Then what? Jack reached into his coat pocket, pulled out Emily's drawing, held it in the moonlight. I just needed to stop. Thursday came again. The kind that didn't look like much from the outside. Crisp light, clear skies. The kind of morning folks would call beautiful if they weren't paying attention to what lived underneath it. Jack didn't take Emily to school. He kept her home. She didn't ask why, just curled up on the couch with her knees to her chest, holding a worn stuffed rabbit Jack didn't recognize. Maybe Helen had picked it up from a yard sale, or maybe it had been waiting in a forgotten drawer until it was needed. I don't want to go to youth reflection anymore, Emily said. Jack sat on the floor across from her, notebook in hand, pen resting between his fingers. You don't have to, he said. Her eyes didn't quite meet his. But they'll call. He nodded. Let them. Around noon, he made lunch. Grilled cheese. Apple slices. The same way Caleb used to like it. Emily picked at the sandwich, ate all the apple. Jack watched her chew. Her small mouth. Her careful bites. Like she was rationing safety. He thought about the list in his notebook. Names. Times. Patterns. And the one thing still missing, another adult who had seen it. At 3:15 p.m., Jack walked to the school alone. He waited outside until Ms. Talbot stepped out of her classroom. "Can we talk?" She glanced at her watch. "I've got 10 minutes. Jack nodded. They stood under the flagpole, out of earshot from the others. "I need you to tell me the truth," Jack said. "About youth reflection." Ms. Talbot didn't blink, didn't flinch, just looked tired. "I signed the slips," she said. "I'm not asking about paperwork." She looked away. Then, "I don't know everything, but I've seen kids come back with red marks. On the backs of their legs. Sometimes their hands. Always told it was part of the lesson." Jack said nothing. "I told the principal once," she continued. "He told me I was misunderstanding the methods." Jack took out his notebook. "I'm going to report this." "To who?" He paused. "I don't know yet." She looked at him, not with disbelief, but with something like pity. "Mr. Carter." "Jack, this town doesn't listen to whispers. It doesn't even listen to screams. It listens to what keeps it quiet." He nodded slowly. "Close the notebook. Then I'll be loud in a way they can't ignore." That evening, Helen came home late. Her hands smelled like bleach. Jack didn't ask. She set down her purse, then stared at the fridge like she'd forgotten what food was. He handed her a mug of tea. She took it without speaking. "I talked to Talbot," he said. Helen closed her eyes. "I know what you're trying to do," she said. "But we are one family. He is the church. He's not God. No, but he's close enough in a town like this." Silence stretched. The clock ticked like it didn't care. Then Helen whispered, "He made me kneel when I was 12. Jack didn't breathe. He said I was prideful, that I needed to learn submission. My parents were proud. Said I came home quieter. Said I finally listened." Her eyes were open now. Clear. "I never told anyone. Never even thought about it again. Until Emily started flinching." Jack put a hand on her shoulder. She let it sit there. Not forgiveness. Not comfort. Just shared weight. That night, Jack waited outside the church again. He wore black. Not because he needed to hide, but because it felt right, like something between mourning and armor. The annex light came on at 7 o'clock. By 7:12, 5 children had entered. By 7:20, Reverend Dale arrived. At 7:45, Jack moved. He crept toward the side window, the one half covered by trellis. He stood where he knew the angle was sharp but usable. Inside, he saw children sitting in a circle, Bibles open, a single chair in the middle, empty. Reverend Dale stood behind it, one hand on its back. Jack couldn't hear him, but he watched his mouth move. Watched a girl rise, slowly, reluctantly. She stepped toward the chair, paused, shook her head. Reverend Dale placed a hand on her shoulder, guided her down. She flinched. Jack turned away, not out of weakness, but because he had seen enough. Back home, he wrote it all down, every detail. Then he turned to a new page and began drafting a letter. Not to the school, not to the church, to the newspaper in the next town over. Then another, then the county paper. By midnight, he had 3 versions, all handwritten. He folded them carefully, tucked them into envelopes, each one sealed like a promise. In the corner of one envelope, he wrote, "This is not about religion. It's about children." He didn't sign his name. He didn't need to. The truth, once seen, doesn't need an author. Friday came heavy, the kind of heavy that didn't show on the weather app. Skies were blue, the temperature mild, but the weight, it sat on people's shoulders, pressed behind their eyes. Jack felt at the moment he stepped into the post office. Paula didn't greet him this time, just handed over the mail with a nod and avoided his gaze. He tucked the 3 envelopes into the inside pocket of his coat, the ones he'd written the night before. Then, without asking, walked around the counter, straight to the outgoing bin. "You're not supposed to," Paula started. Jack turned, looked her in the eye. "I need them to get there," he said. She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Jack dropped the envelopes in. Didn't say another word. He stepped back outside into a windless day. Nothing moved. The flags above City Hall stayed limp. The leaves didn't stir. Even the birds were quiet, like everything was waiting to see what happened next. At home, Emily was painting. Watercolors, pale blue and green bleeding into each other across the page. Jack sat beside her, watched in silence. She looked up, held up the paper. "It's our house," she said, "but I made it look softer." Jack smiled. "It does." She turned the paper sideways. She looked at him. No one said a word. He understood. Bell's Hollow had gone quiet, but not the kind of quiet that came from peace. The kind that came before a verdict. That evening, Jack drove past the church. Not to spy, not to watch, just to see if the light was still on. It wasn't. The annex was dark. The door closed. A shadow moved past the steeple window. but he couldn't make out who. He drove on. We got home. Emily was already in bed. Helen stood in the hallway, holding a folded piece of paper. "This came today," she said, "from Claire's mom." Jack took it. The handwriting was neat. "I believe you. Claire never told me, but I've seen the bruises. If you speak, I'll stand with you." Jack didn't speak, just set the note down on the kitchen table. Later, while Helen slept, he opened his notebook again and wrote, "Friday, 9:04 p.m. First confirmation. We are not alone." The next morning, Jack went to the hardware store, bought a small stack of poster board, a permanent marker, and a box of tacks. The clerk didn't ask why, didn't make eye contact. Jack went home, cleared the dining table. He drew 5 signs, big black letters. Nothing fancy, just truth. Ask your children what happens in the annex. Silence protects the wrong people. If it hurts to sit, it's not discipline. Youth reflection is not healing. How many knees had to bleed before you noticed? He didn't tell Helen, didn't explain to Emily, just packed the signs in the back of the truck and drove to town square. By noon, they were up. One on the bulletin board in front of City Hall, one on the library fence, 2 on trees across from the church. Deny loudly and pretend it never saw anything unless forced to. But this time, it couldn't look away, because now the children were watching too. Back home, Jack found Emily in the yard. She was sitting under the oak tree, tracing her hands on the grass. She looked up when he came closer. "I heard someone at school say you're causing trouble," she said. Jack crouched beside her. "Do you think I am?" She tilted her head, then shrugged. "I think you're telling the truth." He smiled. That night, they ate in silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. Not the hollow kind. This one had weight. Purpose. Like a note held long after the music stopped. In the dark, long after the dishes had been done and the lights turned low, Jack stepped outside, stood on the porch, looked out at a town that still pretended it wasn't changing, even as the cracks deepened. He lit a cigarette, not out of habit, out of ritual, something to do with his hands while the world spun slower than it should. When he exhaled, the smoke curled up like a ghost rising, quiet, unnoticed, but impossible to ignore once you saw it. He whispered into the wind, "I'm not done." And the wind, soft and steady, seemed to whisper back, "Good." Sunday. Church bells rang, same as always. 10 slow peals across the hollow, echoing off porch rails and kitchen windows like a memory you didn't ask for but couldn't stop hearing. Jack didn't go to church, but Helen did. She took Emily with her. Jack stood on the porch and watched them walk down the road. Helen in her gray coat, Emily in her faded pink dress, the hem fluttering just above her muddy sneakers. Emily glanced back once. Jack lifted his hand in a half wave. She didn't wave back, just looked, like she wanted him to see something she hadn't found words for yet. The church was fuller than usual. People came early. Helen moved to leave, but Emily stayed in her seat. "Emily," Helen whispered. Emily looked up. "I want to leave it here," she said. She tore the drawing from her notebook, folded it neatly, and slid it into the hymnal rack on the back of the pew. Then she got up and walked out. Helen followed. Back at home, Jack was splitting firewood. Not for warmth, just something to break. When Helen returned, she stood at the edge of the yard, watching him. He didn't stop chopping, didn't speak. She walked over, picked up a split log, and stacked it beside the porch. They worked like that for 20 minutes. No plan, no explanation. When they were done, Helen dusted off her hands and said, "There's talk." Jack wiped sweat from his brow. "Let them talk." She nodded. "It's different this time. They're quieter." Jack leaned on the axe handle. "Quiet doesn't mean safe." "No," she said, "but maybe it means scared." That evening, there was a knock at the door. Jack opened it to find Mrs. Kirby. She looked smaller without her usual nurse's scrubs. Just a plain cardigan and a purse held tight against her chest. "I came to return a book," she said, holding out a children's Bible Jack had never seen before. He took it unsure. "I read it to Emily once," she explained. "Thought maybe she wanted back." Jack nodded slowly. "You didn't have to come all the way out here." Mrs. Kirby looked past him, into the house. "I saw the signs," she said. "And the papers." Jack waited. "I didn't know." She whispered. "Or maybe I didn't let myself." Jack didn't offer her comfort, didn't offer absolution. Just stepped back and said, "You want to come in?" She hesitated, then stepped over the threshold. They sat at the kitchen table. Jack didn't ask questions. He just waited. Mrs. Kirby stared at the grain in the wood, tracing it with her fingertips. I've seen him put his hand on their shoulders. Too long, too tight. She swallowed. One girl, Sarah, she cried in the hallway once. said she didn't want to go back in. Jack wrote the name down. She stopped showing up a few weeks later, Mrs. Kirby said. Her family moved. No bouvier. Jack looked up. Would you say that under oath? Mrs. Kirby's eyes welled, but she nodded. Yes. After she left, Jack stepped out to the mailbox. Inside was a single letter, no return address. He opened it under the porch light. I remember kneeling too. I thought I was the only one. That night, he added a new page to the notebook. There are others. He underlined it 3 times. Then he sat by the window, watching the trees move. A storm was coming. Not rain, not wind. Something slower, deeper, the kind that didn't shake houses, just the things inside them. Emily came into the room, barefoot and quiet. She climbed into his lap, tucked her head under his chin. Jack held her, listened to the wind outside and the clock ticking softly behind them. Did you see my drawing? She asked. I didn't, he said. What was it? She thought for a second, then whispered. It was a picture of me walking away. He closed his eyes, held her tighter, didn't say a word, didn't have to. Some truths didn't need to be spoken. They just needed someone to stay while they were carried. Monday arrived on tiptoe. The sun rose, but it didn't warm. Jack stood at the window with a cup of weak coffee, watching the school bus rattle past their mailbox. Emily didn't ride it. She sat at the kitchen table, swinging her legs under the chair, eyes following the dust trail through the trees. Helen packed her lunch anyway. Peanut butter and banana slices cut into half moons. A folded napkin with a heart drawn in pen. I want to go back, Emily said. Helen froze. Jack looked up. You don't have to, he said. Emily nodded. I want to. Not brave, not defiant, just steady. Helen knelt beside her. If anything happens, I'll tell you, Emily whispered. I promise. Jack drove her. A woman Jack had seen dozens of times pulled her son's backpack tight and turned away without a word. Didn't meet his eyes. Miss Talbot waved from the door just once and quickly disappeared inside. Emily held his hand until the last step, then let go and walked in without turning back. Jack stood there a long time, hands in his pockets, not guarding, not watching, just bearing witness. He spent the day walking, not far, just through town, through streets where he used to be invisible, and now he was something else, unwanted, uncomfortable, necessary. At the diner, folks stirred their coffee harder when he passed. At the gas station, a man Jack didn't recognize nodded once, like an apology that had nowhere to land. The library door was locked, though it shouldn't have been. He kept walking. At noon, Jack stopped by the church, not to go inside, just to sit on the steps. He didn't bring a sign, didn't say a word, just sat elbows on knees, eyes on the ground. A child's drawing fluttered beside him, must have blown from the bulletin board. It was simple, a stick figure girl, a window, a long shadow across the floor. Jack picked it up, folded it gently, and tucked it into his coat. Inside, the sanctuary stayed dark. Reverend Dale wasn't seen that day, nor the next. By midweek, the whispers had changed tone. They weren't questioning Jack anymore. They were questioning each other. Did you know? What did you see? Why didn't anyone say something? At the general store, an old man Jack remembered from church decades ago approached with a brown bag of groceries. He cleared his throat, didn't meet Jack's eyes. You did a hard thing, the man muttered. Jack nodded. Not hard enough. The man hesitated. If there's a petition, I'll sign. Back home, the mailbox held another letter. Typed. Neat. No return address. When I was 13, I bled through my jeans after a correction. I told my mother. She told me to be grateful he cared enough to discipline me. I believed her. Until now. See, Jack placed it beside the others. Helen saw it. Didn't ask. She just brought over a manila envelope. These should be kept, she said. He slid all the letters in, sealed it. On the front, he wrote, Emily's town. That night, Helen found Emily sitting in the hallway. Barefoot, pajamas, drawing again. Can't sleep? Helen asked. Emily shook her head. Helen sat beside her, legs stretched across the cold floor. What are you drawing? Emily turned the page toward her. It was a church, but with the roof peeled back like a dollhouse. Inside, little circles, people, sitting with their backs, turned to the pulpit. In the front row, a tiny girl faced forward. Just her. Helen stared at it, then kissed Emily's forehead. You're not alone anymore, she whispered. Emily looked up. I was never alone, Mommy. I was just quiet. Later, Jack stood outside again. It was colder now, the moon sharper. He lit a cigarette. Let the smoke drift over the porch railing. The wind carried the sound of something soft. Maybe laughter, maybe leaves. For a moment, he remembered being 17, sitting on these same steps with his brother, passing his soda back and forth, talking about nothing. That version of him hadn't come back from the war. But this version could stay, if only to hold space. To say, you can tell me. To build a town from the stories no one else would hold. And maybe, one day, plant something in that silence. Something that might grow. Thursday began like any other. Dew on the porch steps. Coffee gone lukewarm before Jack finished it. A crow circling above the water tower, casting a shadow that moved across the street like a lazy hour hand. Jack dressed the same, flannel shirt, worn boots, same military duffel slung across his shoulder. He didn't need to carry anything in it anymore, but habit was a quiet thing. When he dropped Emily off at school, something had shifted. Not the kids. They still ran and shoved and laughed too loud. It was the teachers. 3 of them stood near the front door. Not talking, just watching. One of them gave a nod. Not friendly, not hostile, just human. Jack nodded back. It was the first time someone from the school had looked him in the eye. He didn't plan to go to the annex, but his feet led him there. Like gravity or guilt, the back path was overgrown. The chain-link gate hanging off one hinge. The old annex building stood behind the gym, squat and silent. Its paint peeled in strips like old skin, windows clouded with dust. Jack didn't go inside. He just stood at the door, laid his palm flat against the wood, like feeling for a pulse that wasn't there. In the silence, he could hear something faint, not a memory, a breath, a whisper, maybe his own. He turned and walked away before it could pull him under. Back in town, a girl approached him, maybe 12, maybe younger. Thin arms, sweatshirt too big. Eyes that had seen things nobody her age should. She didn't speak, just handed him a drawing, folded twice, edges worn, then walked away. Jack unfolded it. A row of small figures lined up, facing a wall. One had red behind them. Not blood, just red. At the bottom, a name, Isla. He added it to his coat pocket. Didn't write it down yet. Some things had to rest a while before you gave them shape. That afternoon, Jack went to the sheriff's office. Not to file anything. Not yet. He walked in like a man visiting an old scar. Sheriff Dean looked up from his desk. Didn't stand. Didn't smile. Jack, he said. Jack nodded. Dean. A long pause. I've got letters, Jack said. Names. From kids. Dean didn't flinch. Not enough, the sheriff said. Jack shrugged. It's a start. Dean leaned back, sighed through his teeth. You know what'll happen if you push this. Jack stepped closer. They've already been pushed. Dean looked away. Then, quietly. If I open this, I can't close it again. Jack nodded once. That's the point. He dropped a manila envelope on the desk. Didn't wait for a reply. Walked out. Back home, Emily was sitting on the porch swing, shoeless, her feet not quite touching the floor. A paper cup of lemonade beside her. Half-melted ice swirling in circles. Mom said you want to see the sheriff, she said. Jack sat beside her. It was time. Emily looked down at her knees, picked at a loose thread on her dress. Do you think it's going to get worse? Jack looked out across the yard. The wind had picked up. Clouds gathered low and heavy. Probably, he said. Emily didn't cry, just nodded. I could be brave again, she said. Jack didn't answer, just reached over, held her small hand in his. That night, the phone rang. Helen picked it up in the kitchen. Her voice stayed low. Okay, yes, I understand. She hung up. Jack waited. She turned, eyes unreadable. That was Dean. Jack raised an eyebrow. He's opening an investigation. A long silence stretched between them. Then Helen said, there's going to be a meeting. Town hall. Saturday. Jack nodded. Helen sat down at the table, shoulders drawn tight. People are scared, Jack. I know. Not of him, she whispered. Of the truth. He didn't speak, just rested a hand on the table, open, waiting. Helen reached across. Took it. Later that night, Jack walked the perimeter of the yard. Murphy, the old mutt from next door, trotted beside him. The wind had picked up. Trees groaned. Somewhere in the dark, a barn door clattered open and shut, over and over. Jack didn't fix it. He just let the wind have its say. When he circled back to the porch, he stopped short. On the top step sat another envelope. No name, no return. Inside was a single photo, blurry, taken through glass. It showed a man's hand on child's shoulder. Nothing explicit, but enough. Jack stood there a long time. The wind pulled at the edges of the photo like it wanted to take it away. But Jack held on, folded it once, slipped it into his coat. He looked up at the sky. Heavy, clouded, no stars, but they were still there. Just hidden, just waiting. Saturday came without fanfare. No parade, no protest. Just the dry scrape of wine through the cottonwoods and the low moan of the school's flagpole halyard, knocking gently in rhythm with the breeze. Jack ironed his shirt that morning. Not for vanity, just respect. The kind you show when you're about to walk into a room where people might hate you and still need to hear you. Emily sat at the kitchen table, chewing the end of a pencil. She'd written and erased the same sentence 4 times. The page in front of her had more scars than words. I don't have to speak, right? She asked. No, Helen said from the sink. Only if you want to. Emily looked up at Jack. Will you speak? He hesitated, sipped his coffee. If it's quiet enough. They got to the town hall early. The building was older than it looked, white paint flaking from its columns, one window cracked and taped over. A line had already begun to form. Parents, teachers, farmers, and a few kids gripping the hands of adults. Some looked at Jack and nodded. Some didn't look at all. Inside, the lights flickered once before holding. The rows of folding chairs faced a raised platform with a rickety wooden podium. A single microphone rested on top, coiled cord like a snake waiting to hiss. Sheriff Dean stood to the side, holding a folder tight against his chest. He gave Jack a nod. This time, it held weight. The meeting began like all small-town meetings. A prayer, a pledge, a moment of silence. Then came the slow unraveling. Not loud, not dramatic, just story after story, offered like bruises turned gently in the light. Mrs. Kirby stood first, hands shaking, voice thin. She told the room about Sarah, about the hallway, about the silence afterward. A man Jack didn't know followed. Said his niece had nightmares. Said she stopped going to youth choir without explanation. Didn't name names. Didn't have to. Everyone knew. Everyone always knew. Jack didn't speak until almost the end. He stood, slow and straight, like a man rising in court or at a funeral. He didn't bring notes. Didn't bring photos or files or anything but his voice. My daughter came home with bruises, he said, voice low. Not from falling. Not from roughhousing. From hands. A ripple moved through the room. Not outrage. Recognition. Some of you looked away. Some of you said nothing because nothing was said to you. I understand that. I really do. He paused. But silence is still a kind of choice. He looked toward Emily. She didn't choose this. She didn't deserve it. And she damn sure won't carry alone. He stepped back. Didn't sit down. Just stood at the side of the room. Present. Unmoving. Unapologetic. Then Emily stood. Not pushed. Not prompted. She walked slowly to the front. Small, quiet, but certain. The microphone wobbled when she touched it. She didn't adjust it. Didn't need to. I'm not going to say names, she said. I don't want to think about them anymore. She took a breath. But I remember the carpet. Silence. It was red and scratchy. And I remember thinking, if I stared at it long enough, maybe I'd disappear into it. People shifted in their chairs. I used to think telling was like lighting a fire, she said. That would burn everything down. She looked at Jack. But sometimes telling is like opening a window. When she sat back down, the room didn't erupt. It didn't applaud. It breathed. Like it had been holding its breath for a year and finally let go. Helen took Emily's hand. Jack placed a hand on both their shoulders. And they stayed like that. A small circle inside a larger one. Still. Strong. Enough. After the meeting, people trickled out slow. Some stopped to shake Jack's hand. Others offered quiet nods or just a touch to the arm. No one said the Reverend's name. But no one had to. By dusk, the town had changed. Not fully. Not loudly. But like a room that's been cleaned of smoke. The smell lingers, but the air moves easier. That night, Emily hung a drawing on the fridge. 3 stick figures holding hands. No sados. No red. Just a yellow sun in the corner, drawn with 12 careful rays. Helen looked at it, then kissed the top of her daughter's head. Jack didn't say anything. He just stood back, watched the light fall across the kitchen floor. And in that golden quiet, for the first time in a long time, he didn't brace for the next blow. He just let himself be there. Present. Whole. Still learning how to stay. The day after the meeting, the town didn't burn down. There were no reporters, no protests, no loud condemnations in the streets. It was just Sunday. The bells of Grace Baptist rang out across the rooftops, brittle as ever. Some people still showed up. Some didn't. The Reverend wasn't among them. No one mentioned where he was. No one asked. The pew sat in uneven rows, hymnals untouched, and on the second row from the back. A woman with silver in her braid sat with her eyes closed, mouthing prayers she had said her whole life, but slower now, like she wasn't sure who she was saying them to anymore. Jack didn't go to church. He spent the morning fixing the back gate. The latch had rusted. He replaced it with one from an old shed, the metal cold and stubborn under his grip. Emily watched from the porch steps, sketchbook in hand, drawing trees that didn't exist. "Can we go to the water later?" she asked. Jack nodded. "Yeah, I think we could." He didn't ask why. Didn't need to. There are places in every town where pain hides. And then there are places where people go to outrun it. Water, Jack had learned, was one of the few places where silence didn't feel heavy. It felt sacred. They packed light. Thermos. A blanket. Her pencils. The old paperback Jack carried, but rarely read anymore. Murphy jumped into the truck bed like he understood the plan. The drive was quiet. Fields slipped by, fences sagging in places, mailboxes leaning. The occasional tractor left rusting by the edge of a barn. Life still happening, just slower now. The pier wasn't crowded. It rarely was. A few locals fished off the far end, their lines cutting small arcs through the air. Emily went to the bench, the one she'd told him about. The words were still carved into the wood. "Come back when you're ready." Someone had etched a small heart beside it since she'd last been there. She sat down, opened her sketchbook, and began to draw. Her pencil moved in slow, thoughtful strokes. Jack didn't sit yet. He stood at the railing, staring out at the water. The tide was low. A gull hovered in place for a second, then dipped and vanished behind the dunes. When he did sit, it was beside her, a full arm's length apart, close enough to feel the weight of each other's presence. He flipped open the paperback, read a line, didn't turn the page. That night, Helen found a package on the porch. Wrapped in brown paper, no return address. Inside, a cassette tape, labeled in shaky pen. "I believe you. There was no player in the house anymore. But Helen didn't throw it out. She placed it in the drawer beside the letters, the drawings, the envelope Jack had once marked Emily's town. She didn't say anything to him. She just left the drawer open, long enough for him to notice. Over the next week, small things shifted. A flyer went up at the library. Support circle. Wednesdays, 6 p.m. A woman Jack had never met asked Helen, softly, where she bought Emily's shoes. Not gossip, just presents. At the grocery store, the cashier said thank you and meant it. And when Emily bumped into Ms. Talbot in the school hallway, the woman crouched down to her level and said, "You were very brave. No cameras, no speeches, just words spoken like prayers. Whispered, not performed." On Thursday, Jack went to the post office. There was a letter waiting. No name, just a return address from 2 towns over. Inside, a single sentence handwritten on lined notebook paper. "He hurt my brother in 1992. We never told anyone. Until now." Jack folded it carefully. He didn't file it. He didn't pass it to Dean yet. He just sat in his truck, engine off, hand resting on the steering wheel. For a long while, he didn't move. Then slowly, he reached into the glove box, took out a roll of tape, and sealed the letter into a growing envelope marked Voices. That night, as rain began to pepper the roof in soft, nervous bursts, Jack found Emily asleep on the couch. She'd fallen curled up beside a coloring book and an open map. Crayons scattered like tiny grenades across the cushions. He lifted her gently, blanket and all, carried her to bed. When he pulled the covers up, she stirred. "Is it over?" she mumbled, half asleep. He knelt down, brushing hair from her forehead. "No," he whispered. "But it's quieter now." She nodded in her dreams. And Jack sat beside her for a long time. Not guarding, just being, just staying. Outside, the rain softened into a hush, tapping gently against the windows. Inside, the house held steady, still full of echoes, yes, but also full of breath. And for the first time in years, Jack believed that maybe, just maybe, this town would learn how to carry its own weight. One whisper at a time. By the 3rd week of October, the town had settled into its late autumn hush. Trees half naked, their leaves scattered like old letters across sidewalks and porches. The air carried that soft, woody smell, damp earth, chimney smoke, and something else too. The faint promise of stillness that didn't threaten to unravel you. Jack had stopped checking the mailbox every morning. Whatever needed to find him would. Emily's drawings had changed. Less red, more green. She didn't talk about it, but her sketchbook pages now held small hills, sun-drenched porches, dogs lying in patches of light. The people still didn't have faces, just soft outlines, but they stood closer together now. She pinned one to the fridge, a girl holding a kite string, her arms steady in the wind. Helen stood beside Jack that night, staring at it. "She's still scared," she said. Jack nodded. "So am I." Helen didn't answer, but she leaned into his shoulder. "Let it rest there. Not for long. Just enough." The house began to sound different. It wasn't louder, just more lived in. Drawers opened and closed without slamming. Floors creaked with familiar weight. The kettle whistled at 4 o'clock like it used to. The bathroom light flickered twice before staying on. Jack started waking up without dread in his chest. It surprised him. Sometimes he'd sit on the edge of the bed, boots not yet on, and just breathe. They used to feel like a waste of time. Now it felt like something sacred. One morning, Emily asked if they could go to the library. Not for any book in particular, just to sit. They picked the corner with the sun-soaked window. She curled up with a dog-eared novel about horses. Jack leafed through a local history book, reading names of people who had once walked the same streets, planted the same trees, buried the same regrets. A boy around Emily's age sat near them. He looked over once, didn't say anything, but didn't move away either. And Emily didn't shift in her seat, didn't flinch. Jack watched her turn the page, lips mouthing the words like a soft spell. Helen started baking again. Not for sale, just for the smell. Apple crumble, cornbread, a pie with a cracked crust that she laughed at, then served anyway. Neighbors stopped by, first just one, then another, returning dishes they hadn't borrowed, asking about Murphy, offering spare jam jars, old birdseed, stories of nothing in particular. People rarely said her name, Helen. They just said, "You," and let it hang in the air like something earned. She didn't offer much in return, just coffee, a nod, sometimes a "thank for stopping." But her eyes didn't close off anymore. They stayed open, even when no one was looking. Jack started keeping a notebook, not a journal, just words that came. One page had only 4 lines. October 21st, Emily laughed. Murphy chased his tail again. The door doesn't creak anymore. I didn't flinch at the knock. He didn't show anyone. Didn't need to. Some words were just for staying sane. Some were for remembering what the silence used to sound like. Dean called one night. Not for business. Just to say they'd gotten another letter. This one postmarked 4 states over. Jack listened. Said thank you, then hung up. He didn't write it down. Some pain belonged to others now. His job wasn't to carry it, just to hold space for it if it needed somewhere to land. One evening, just before sunset, Emily took Jack's hand. "Come on," she said. "Where?" he asked. "Nowhere. Just out." They walked behind the house down to the edge of the woods. The trees rustled like old men whispering secrets. Emily picked up a stick and drew a spiral in the dirt. Jack sat beside her. They didn't talk. Didn't need to. The sky bruised into purples and pinks above them. A single owl called out once. And Emily, not looking up, said softly, "I don't hear him in my head anymore." Jack closed his eyes, just for a second, then opened them. And in that breath, the ache didn't disappear, but it loosened, just enough to let the air in. Back at the house, the porch light flickered once before staying on. Jack locked the front door, turned off the kitchen lamp, and paused in the hallway. He pressed his hand flat to the wall, the same wall he'd leaned against the night Emily first whispered those words. "It hurts when I sit." He didn't pull away, just left his hand there. Not for memory, not for mourning, but for something quieter, something like peace. Jack started waking earlier than usual. Not from nightmares, not from duty, just waking. No need for an alarm. The first orange slip of dawn would crawl across the wall, and his body would rise before his mind even asked it to. The air was cooler now, October edging toward November. The kind of chill that crept through floorboards and reminded a man of places he'd slept before. Foxholes, tents, concrete bunkers with names he'd never speak aloud. But here, the cold was different. Here, it just meant coffee would taste better. He brewed a pot each morning. Strong, black, the way Caleb used to like it. He didn't drink it all. Poured a second cup. Left it on the table across from his own. Helen never asked, and Jack never said. But the cup stayed full. Not forgotten, acknowledged. Sometimes grief doesn't want to be solved, just witnessed. Emily's school was holding a fall concert. Just a few songs. Nothing grand. She wasn't singing. She'd helped paint the backdrop. Yellow leaves, a blue river. A bridge that didn't exist in town, but looked like one Jack remembered from the Smoky Mountains. The night of the concert, she wore a simple green dress, soft cotton, with a bow tied too loose in the back. Jack offered to fix it. She let him. His hands, once trained to field strip rifles, moved carefully across fabric now tug, fold, knot. A gesture that said, I see you. I'm here. You're safe. They sat on the bleachers. Jack, Helen, a space between them for coats and thermoses, and maybe unspoken things still being worked through. The lights dimmed. Children sang, some too loud, some off-key. One forgot the words entirely and just smiled. And the crowd, made of parents with tired eyes and teachers clapping too long, didn't laugh or whisper or judge. They just listened, because sometimes you show up not for perfection, but for presence. Jack caught himself smiling. Not big, just enough. Enough to feel it in his chest. Enough to remember he had muscles there. Afterward, they walked home. Emily's hands in her coat pockets. Murphy sniffing the sidewalk ahead. Jack noticed how she didn't walk behind anymore. Didn't shuffle. Didn't flinch when strangers passed. Instead, she stopped once, crouched down, and picked up a small brown leaf shaped like a heart. She handed it to him. It's kind of broken, she said. Jack looked at it. One side torn. The stem frayed. Still a heart, he said. The next day, Helen painted the front door. Nothing dramatic. Just a new coat of blue. Lighter than before. A color that caught the light and made the porch feel less like a waiting room and more like a place someone lived. Emily left handprints on the step by accident. Wet paint under her fingers. Helen didn't scold. Didn't clean them off. Just smiled. And left them there. A record. Of being here. Of choosing to stay. Later that week, a neighbor brought over a sapling. Small. Barely up to Jack's knee. Figured your yard looked like it could use something that knows how to hold on, the man said, scratching his neck. Jack nodded. Planted it the next morning. No ceremony. No shovel speech. Just dirt. Roots. Water. And the quiet trust that growth would come. In time, that Sunday, Helen took down the old calendar. The one with the church holidays and faded ink. She replaced it with a hand-drawn one. Emily's design. Simple boxes. Sunflowers on the corners. And one square circled in red. November 11th, Jack home. She'd written it weeks ago. No one had noticed. Now, no one wanted to erase it. That night, Jack stood on the porch. The light was on. The blue door behind him warm in the glow. He could hear Helen in the kitchen, humming low. Emily upstairs, flipping pages of a book. The kind of sound a house makes when it starts remembering you. Not just as a visitor, but as a man returned. Not as a hero. Not as a soldier. Just Jack. He sat down. Same chair. Same spot. But it felt different now. Like it belonged. Like he did. He reached into his pocket. Pulled out the crumpled leaf. The broken heart one. Set it on the railing beside him. Didn't say a word. Just let it catch the breeze. And for the first time since he came home, he didn't brace for it to blow away. He just let it be there. Still. Enough. Some stories don't end with justice. They end with people choosing not to run anymore. With a porch light that stays on. A child who finally laughs from her belly. A man who stops checking windows before he sleeps. Jack didn't save the world. He just stayed. He stayed through silence. Through nights when breathing felt like betrayal. Through mornings that came too slow. And in that staying, something began to mend. Not all at once, but inch by inch, like frost retreating from a window pane. You wouldn't notice it, unless you were looking for it. Unless you knew what it cost to believe in the quiet again. If this story found a soft place in you. If you saw a piece of your father, your child, yourself. Tell me, what moment made you stop and feel the stillness? You don't need to explain. Just leave a memory, a whisper, or a name. And let someone else feel a little less alone tonight. We're all just trying to come home. In our own way. In our own time. Together.